The conversation surrounding equal justice for all people has varying opinions these days, depending on who you ask or what news channel you tune into. In an online survey of a representative national sample, 45% of Canadians agree that the justice system treats everyone fairly. Meanwhile, 43% disagreed, while another 12% were undecided. This is according to the research company. Dr. Leland Harper is an associate professor of philosophy and an associate professor of race, justice, and equality studies at Siena Heights University. He has a strong professional background in the hospitality industry, operations management, training, problem analysis, and sales. He is also the founder of his own consulting firm, which bears his name. The firm was founded with one simple mission: to change the way that the Canadian hospitality industry looks at diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Dr. Harper joined me this week to tell me exactly how they get this done and how the employment industry as a whole can create a more equitable environment for individuals with disabilities and other marginalized groups to thrive. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Dr. Harper, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to talk to you about the intersection of religion, race, and justice this morning. Great to see you this morning, and happy Monday to you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Absolutely. No. Dr. Harper, I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by you simply giving me a 360-degree view of who you are and what makes you so fabulous and why you love the work that you do.
Yeah, sure. My name's Leland Harper. I'm a philosopher by trade. And so right now I focus a little bit on philosophy of race. So mostly issues related to how we speak about race-based situations. And I guess so how that leads into my consulting component is I've worked in the nightclub industry, the hospitality industry for about 20 years or so. And when COVID hit and I got knocked out from behind my bar, as most hospitality workers did, or out of the restaurant, nightclub, whatever, it's an industry I love, and I was just trying to figure out how to keep my foot in the door. And so that was kind of the opportunity I had to blend my academic pursuits with my, less academic pursuits, I guess, of being behind a bar and being in nightclubs, and start doing some work in terms of trying to just make the entire industry more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive, all those kind of things. Because really identified a gap where, diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants are a dime a dozen. You see us everywhere. But a lot of that stuff doesn't really translate down to the nightclub industry, the hospitality industry, because it's just so different. You need somebody with that lived experience. So that's the niche that I've been able to put myself into. And it's been going well so far, the first couple of years of it. Other than that, I got 2 young kids, so they keep me on my feet, running around, chasing them, doing all sorts of stuff. That's about it, really. All that fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Harper, when we look at uh, the the lives that we live today, I'm curious your thoughts on how you think race, religion, and equality and justice are interconnected. Because I actually believe it's sort of a melting pot of things coming together. So when we look at all those things, how do you think they're interconnected?
Yeah, I think for me the interesting things about religion and race are that um, for a lot of people they're such big parts of their lives, right? For a lot of folks, that's such a defining feature of their identity, either their race or their religion or both. Not to say it's the only defining feature, of course, but it's a big component for a lot of folks. And even if it isn't a big defining component for your identity, chances are you're going to be interacting with folks who have that as a large part of their identity. For example, I'm not a religious person, but I work at a Catholic university, so I'm dealing with people who are very strong in their faith. Um, and so I think those are two important components of life that we need to that everybody should have at least a general understanding of, and be able to speak with folks who are different than them, or feel different than them, or look different than them, or think different than them, and being able to accommodate the different needs of folks. So I think that's where the interesting component of it, or well, I guess where I get interest in these topics, in terms of justice, inequity, that kind of stuff, right? They're just identity markers, right? And I think we see a lot of inequity, a lot of injustice along those lines of race, religion, and those are just the two particular areas that I happen to focus on.
Yeah, and when we translate that to the workplace, Dr. Harper, I'm also wondering your thought on how we can sort of bridge the gap of racial divisions and inequities for marginalized groups and individuals with disabilities to make it a more equitable playing field.
Yeah. So I think it's tough. I mean, when we think about it, I don't think there's any kind of solid blanket answer, and I think that's what a lot of folks want, right? They want that kind of silver bullet to, how do I make my organization, or how do I make society better? And I think it's just different in each situation depending on, your own standing, your own privileges, what exactly you're trying to attack. But I think at the very basic level, it's education, right? So I think um, once we get on this, we set the foundation for what everybody kind of should know or ought to know. Then we can start to move forward, and then we start making, these kind of moral judgments or character-based judgments. But until then, we have to get everything set. And so I think that's one of the focuses that I take as that education component, right? Being an educator, that's the path I've chosen to take, is to get everybody on that same level playing field. So we're talking about things in the right way, using the right kind of terminology, seeing the right things, exploring these different lenses through which we can view society. And I think that's a general starting point, because I operate with the general idea that everybody's concerned with justice in some form or another, right? We might have different ways of how we look at justice, but everybody's in the pursuit of that or working toward that. And so it's trying to figure out how we can attain that using our different positions.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Harbour, I'm a big component of believing that folks with disabilities can provide businesses a competitive advantage when it comes to solving problems or being innovative. So talk to me about the importance of sort of changing the perspective and the competitive advantage that folks with disabilities can provide to a workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is the world has not been designed for folks with disabilities. So, I mean, folks with disabilities, whether they're visible or invisible, have been, problem solving their entire lives to go around these different barriers, these different roadblocks, all those kind of things. And really, when we're looking at the labor market and what employers are looking for right now, it's problem solvers, right? It's folks who can get around some of these bigger issues that their organizations are dealing with. And that's something that folks with disabilities are uniquely set up to be able to do, and to look at things from different perspectives. And I think that's something that's just often overlooked by so many employers, because it's just not a lived experience for so many of them, at least the people who are making some of the decisions. So I think that's one of those really great ways that we can start to integrate folks with disabilities into the kind of more mainstream workforce beyond kind of gig economy and that kind of stuff, and really start to leverage some of those strengths that are generally untapped by that labor market.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Harper, when we talk about equality in the workplace and folks with disabilities, I think it's an interwoven discussion. So talk to me about how you think those two things are interconnected and the amount of progress you think we've made versus how far you still believe we have to go.
Yeah, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the progress we've made. So I think there's been, I don't know, it's kind of hard to put quantitatively, I guess, right? So there's been progress, and in that these folks that I talk to and organizations that I see, they're at least starting to have these conversations, right? And so I think that's the very first step. Where we need to go now is moving from talking about it into action, right? It's not just about having conversations in boardrooms or on Zoom or whatever it is anymore. We need to actually turn some of these plans into action, and I think that's where you're starting to see the distinction between a lot of these organizations and which organizations actually want to do something and put their money and time and effort where their mouth is versus those who are more so just performative, right? So it's being able to create these workplaces that are more accessible, more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable, for folks, and not even just workplaces, but cities, that kind of thing, environments, spaces. So I think there has been some progress made, but there is still a very, very long way that we need to go.
Yeah, and to that point, based on sort of the societal norms of today, Dr. Harper, I'm curious, how do you think employers can better start the conversation of inclusion to really make sure that their employees are really invested in the process? Because I think when you can see that leaders at the highest level are invested in a process, making those changes in an organization is a lot more easier, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, it starts with a culture of trust and establishing that within your organization, right? Because I think in most cases, and I think most senior leadership would agree with me on this, is that the true value of your organization is in your employees and your staff and your partners and that kind of stuff. And so, we have these organizations with this tremendous wealth of knowledge within them through their employees, but these employees may not feel comfortable sharing that knowledge or those experiences for whatever number of reasons if there isn't a culture of trust. So really fostering that culture of trust within the organization, starting from the top down, right? Being invested in your employees, having personal conversations with them, understanding that they have lives outside of the office or outside of the organization, and just building those genuine relationships is, I think, the first and most important step to going and getting some of that information. And then as we start to build that trust, then we can start to bring in, a more solid, a more robust understanding of what some of the values and strengths of these folks are, where some of the weaknesses of the organizations are. And that should, at least at the very beginning, start to build a sense of community, which can then kind of foster in this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, as you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, that's sort of the mission of your own consulting firm now that you've opened and really changing the way the hospitality industry looks at the E&I. And so I'm curious, with your expertise within the hospitality industry, and since you started your consulting firm, I'm curious, what sort of progress do you think we've made in the gig economy to better infuse folks with disabilities and other marginalized groups as well?
Yeah. So I guess I'll speak first specifically to the hospitality industry and then kind of shift over to the gig economy a little bit. Because there are intersections, but there's a little bit of distinction there. So I think within hospitality, there's been tremendous progress. Not necessarily in the sector as a whole, but in a lot of individual establishments, organizations that I've worked with. So I think we're slowly moving. Back when I started, I was denied opportunities based on the way that I looked, based on the way that I acted, based on the way that I spoke, based on the person that I was. And this is going back not even too far, right? We're talking in the past 10, 15 years that I was denied certain opportunities. And I won't necessarily get into them here, but there was a ton of them. Um, and so when I was denied those opportunities, but I was able to overcome them, even I operated with some of those ideas of, okay, well, I had to face these barriers, and I was able to make it, so why can't other folks do the same thing, right? That's a kind of common conception or a common idea that we might have. And so I operated with that. But now I've switched to saying, well, I overcame these barriers. Why should those barriers even be there in the first place, right? I shouldn't be expecting others to overcome them. So, and I think that a lot of leadership that I've worked with or had the opportunity to work with in these spaces, they've started to understand that. Because it's folks of my generation. Now I'm getting a little bit older, right? We're the ones that are starting to move into leadership in these roles, right? I'm not the 18-year-old anymore. So I think we're all kind of coming to that realization that this isn't necessarily the way it should be. And even further than that, it's just more profitable to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive in your organization. So that's the hospitality component. On the gig economy, I think again, we're along the lines of having some of those conversations. It's not quite there yet in terms of where it needs to be. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So where I see one of the biggest challenges or gaps, I guess, is in the kind of, I guess, safeties that are afforded the typical kind of employer-employee relationship that aren't present, those kind of safeguards that aren't present in the gig economy, right? So a lot of anti-discrimination policy and legislation that exists in the typical traditional employee-employer relation doesn't exist within the gig economy. It does in some places, but not everywhere. And so I think there needs to be more regulation, more policy in terms of how to protect folks who are working in the gig economy. Similarly, in terms of access to technology, right? A lot of stuff in the gig economy now is predicated on access to technology, whereas not a lot of folks or not everybody either has access to the technology or knows how to use it or has the right supplemental equipment that they need to access that technology. So being able to standardize things in that way would make things a lot more equitable for everyone who wants to participate in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Harper, for any employer who may be watching or listening to this morning, I'm curious about your message to them about creating a roadmap towards inclusion. If those employers could spend 5 to 10 minutes with you and ask you to sort of create a roadmap so that they can better infuse folks with disabilities and other marginalized groups into their workforce, what would you tell them as the first step to sort of creating that roadmap and having that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's the first step is always embracing humility, right? It's about being able to acknowledge that you're not an expert in everything, and I think that's sometimes tough for leaders to do because they've gotten to where they are, they've gotten to become leaders, and in most cases that they're the person that people go to for answers. And so I think it's being able to embrace the idea that we don't necessarily know everything, we're not necessarily an expert in everything, and that's not a bad thing, right? Being able to defer to others, especially in this day and age, as these kind of ideas within the workforce shift, is not seen as detrimental. It's seen as a positive attribute in leadership. And so I think being able to understand that and maybe start speaking to people who have that lived experience or that expertise or whatever we want to call it, and bringing them into the fold and deferring to them on some of these things. So whether that means leaning on folks who are already within your organization, or perhaps bringing in an external voice, someone like me or you, to have some of these conversations and look at what some of those things look like. I think that's the very, very first step. And then from there, we go on to the learning components and then the implementation. So it's kind of going in, understanding that we don't know everything, trying to correct that a little bit, bring the knowledge up to where it needs to be, and then working on some strategic plans on how to get some of these things implemented, because we're not going to be able to implement everything. Not every organization has all of the different resources available to them, right? We have some companies that have billions of dollars and money's not an issue. We have other companies that are obviously much smaller, have limitations, right? So it's about prioritizing what needs to be done. And and an external voice isn't necessarily going to be able to provide the best insight on that. We need the folks that are in there at the table to do that. So it's a very collaborative process of being able to share knowledge, I think, going both ways.
Yeah, Dr. Harper, as you know, I was the first regional ambassador for the Discoverability Network in Ontario, and one of the sayings that we had at the Chamber of Commerce is that we get more done when we collaborate, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, Dr. Harper, I'm just gonna share something with you. So I have a sort of a life philosophy that I live by, and it says that inclusion is the gateway to independence because I believe if you include more people, more opportunities are granted for everyone. So tell me about sort of breaking down those attitudinal barriers too, so that we can all get to a place of inclusion. I'm curious to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I approach it really is, having a lack of inclusion is just plain boring, really. I don't want to hang out with people who are exactly like me, or I don't want to necessarily work with people or be around folks who are exactly like me all the time, who are telling me stories that I know, or that I've already experienced. It's just boring. It may be cool for an hour or two, but after that, it gets, like I said, boring. I want to be able to share my knowledge. I want to be able to gain more knowledge. I want to be able um, to grow as a person, as a professional, as an organization, whatever it is. And so I think that's something that hopefully we start to embrace more in our attitudes, right? And that again, that humility component, I think, is something that we want to do. And that's something that, you know, the millennial kind of workforce is more on board with. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a culture change in terms of the workforce. So I mean, I think the numbers, depending on where you look, millennials are supposed to make up around 75 to 80% of the workforce within the next few years. And that's a big shift from the baby boomers, right? Who have been the bulk of the workforce for a long time now. And so it's being able to understand that collaborative component and what millennials are looking for. It's just not going to work if you don't build in that concept of inclusion, right? We want to be able to joke around and have fun with our colleagues. We don't necessarily want to just sit in a cubicle all day by ourselves. We want to have these conversations. We want our work to be meaningful, and also, pay our bills and do all the things that it's supposed to do. But we want to be able to enjoy ourselves and have a sense of community as well. So I think that's one of those important things that the leadership now is having to recognize as we see this shift in the labor market.
Yeah, I have to tell you, making authentic human connections is so much fun, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I think a lot of us, at least me coming from the hospitality industry, that's one of the reasons I stayed in the hospitality industry, the number of great people I was able to meet. So yeah, I've enjoyed it. And I think that's a great way to have your sense of worth, increased at work, your sense of value.
Yeah, and Dr. Harper, I'm also fascinated to ask you about what do you think it means to make a sizable investment in inclusion, equity, and diversity as an employer? What do you think that means?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting conversation to have, right? I mean, I work with some organizations who money is not an issue for them, right? They have all the money in the world. They can throw however money they need to at whatever initiative they want to throw money at, and that's great, right? But that's not all it is. So there's some companies that they have the resources to do that. Great, by all means. I'm not going to tell you to stop giving money to it, to devoting resources to it. Um, Most organizations, I'd say probably 99%, I don't have any kind of figures, but don't have that kind of freedom with their resources. But it can mean anything from devoting 5, 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of every staff meeting to discuss it, right? Just to make sure it's on the agenda. Those kind of things. It can be the creation of a standing, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging committee. Those kind of things, right? So it doesn't have to be a massive, let's throw $1 million at this, let's create a whole new office for diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Again, that'd be great, but it's just not feasible or reasonable for a lot of organizations. So just being able to start having those conversations and making sure that it permeates all components of your organization, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean hiring one person, and it's just their specific portfolio to look at that, or in their portfolio to specifically manage that. But it can be the job of everybody. And when it's in there, in the employee culture, in the organizational culture, it doesn't seem like such a big lift because you have everybody in the company working toward it. So I think that's kind of what I see in terms of the bigger investment, and understanding that it is an important component that doesn't have to be seen as being something that's in competition with your primary business, but very much integrated to your primary business.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Howard, my final two questions are sort of interconnected, so I'll ask them both at once. I'm curious to get your final message to anyone in the hospitality industry or management in human resources about really starting the conversation about inclusion as we talked about. I wonder your final message to them about not only the tangible business benefits, but also the learning benefits too, because I truly believe that life is a constant game of learning. And my final question for you specifically is: when you look at your life, sort of from a personal and professional standpoint, how do you want your legacy to be defined?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, you know, for me, it's pretty simple. I mean, and maybe this has been my shift since I had kids, but just leaving the world a better place for my kids, right? So that they don't have to deal. Not that I had a super tough life growing up or anything. My mom did a great job of providing me what she could, um, and just allowing my children to grow up without some of the barriers that I grew up with, whether I knew they were barriers or not. Um, and of course, I want that broadly to expand, to more society as well. But I think those are some of the considerations I want to pass along in terms of my legacy, and just this idea that we don't have to accept the status quo. Things aren't the way they are, and that's not or things are the way they are, but that's not the way they always have to be, and that we can make positive change, right? Even if we're only one person. I'm just one person, but I'm trying to make a positive difference. And I think trying to instill that not just in myself and the people I work with, but my children and my community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Harper, finally tell me, if people want to get connected with the good work that you do, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah. So we have LinkedIn, which is one of the ways that you and I connected. So I'm on there as Leland Harper. You can find me on Instagram at L Harper Consulting, and then online as well at www.lharperconsulting.com.
Well, Dr. Harper, I want to thank you for accepting my invitation to engage in conversation for the first time. I know that in a couple of weeks we'll have the pleasure to meet in person, but until then, I want to thank you for your work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for joining me this morning to engage in conversation on this important topic, my friend. Thank you so very much for your time and for being here this morning.
Great, and thanks for inviting me. I look forward to seeing you, in 2 weeks in Hamilton? Kingston? Kingston.
Kingston.
Kingston. I'm good. I'm going, not going the other way. So
we've got to make sure that the GPS goes the right way, right,
I got the hotel booked, so
that's exactly right. Well, I want to thank you for your time, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks, okay?
Have a great day.